Israel's assault on Iran comes while it's still attacking Gaza and Lebanon. After bombing Syria, Yemen and Qatar in the past year, what are the risks for Israel opening another battlefront and the risks from the collapse or survival of the Islamic Republic? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Rishaad. Salamat. Israel is at war yet again, and for the second time in a year, against Iran. It comes as Israeli attacks continue in Lebanon and Gaza, where it's killed more than 72,000 Palestinians. Since 2024, it's also bombed Syria, Yemen and Qatar. Israel says it wants regime change and to stop Iran from developing a nuclear bomb, something the Islamic Republic denies doing. Only two outcomes are possible. Iran either survives or falls, but could both scenarios pose dangers for Israel? Could a more emboldened or hardline Iran emerge? Or could regional chaos unfold with widespread humanitarian and economic impacts which could hit Israel's Western allies hard? We'll explore more with our guest shortly, but first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
Israeli attacks are expanding across the Middle East, now drawing in Lebanon and Iran's ally, Hezbollah. The Israeli military is warning all options are on the table there, including a ground operation. On Monday, Israel bombarded Iran with a fresh wave of strikes, hitting a hospital in the capital Tehran, as well as police stations. Both the US and Israel say they want regime change. The first attacks, launched on Saturday, assassinated the supreme leader and wiped out much of Iran's top military command. But the Red Crescent says the death toll is far greater, more than 550 people so far. Among the victims, children, killed in a joint US-Israeli strike that hit a girls' school. And the Iranian government hasn't fallen. It's created an interim leadership council and is working on choosing the next supreme leader. Apparently unswayed, the Israeli prime minister is promising an escalation.
We are in a campaign in which we are bringing the full force of the Israeli Defense Forces as never before. But we are also bringing into this campaign the assistance of the United States. And this enables us to do what I have long hoped to do for 40 years, to strike the terror regime decisively.
Benjamin Netanyahu has long viewed Iran as Israel's most dangerous existential threat. But the consequences of yet another war are quickly being felt. Iran has launched drones and missiles at Israel, sending many people into underground shelters. In one attack on the city of Beit Shemesh, several people were killed and others are still missing, believed to be buried under the rubble.
It's just devastating, really devastating. People are killed here, not only in the synagogue, but also mother and daughter who live in that house.
Israeli reaction to yet another war is mixed.
The situation is the best that can be for the Middle East and all the world, all the free world, because now we are in the path to a different regime in Iran.
I think this war was no needed. It's only for political things, only for Bibi to stay on the government.
As the death toll rises and instability continues, Netanyahu will need to be clear about how these conflicts benefit Israelis. He's facing an election this year, an ongoing corruption trial, and is wanted at The Hague, accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guest. Alon Pinkas is a former ambassador and consul general of Israel in New York. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Rami Khouri is a distinguished fellow at the American University of Beirut. He joins us from Boston. And in West Jerusalem is Mitchell Barak, founder of Kevoon Research, Strategy and Communications, and a former aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A warm welcome to all of you. Mitchell, going to start things off with you and just get us a broad brushstroke of how you see things unfolding.
First of all, I'd like to wish a Ramadan Kareem to all of the people watching who are celebrating and commemorating this holiday. It is also a fast day in Israel, the Fast of Esther, which commemorates, ironically and interestingly enough, the victory of the Jewish people over an evil Persian empire 2,500 years ago. So this is a holiday week for everyone. Kids are off from school anyway, tomorrow and the next day. So now they have the full week off. And it really is coming to life, this whole Purim story, this whole story of Persia and defeating an evil empire. But I must say that a lot of people are really behind this effort because they believe the words of the Islamic Republic of Iran that has been saying for many, many years that Israel has no right to exist. Death to America, death to Israel, like we just heard the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War of the United States say in a live press conference.
Rami, it's very easy to start a war, but it's very hard to end one successfully. So one has to look at the aims here.
Well, I think the aims are pretty clear from the American and the Israeli side, and they've been talking about this for years. There's nothing hidden. They want to get rid of Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities, make sure it never has a weapon, which is the aim that Iran itself says it never wants a weapon, but that's secondary because the Israeli and American governments tend not to deal with the reality, but they tend to deal with what they perceive to be dangers to them or ancient myths from thousands of years ago. In either case, the clear aim is to get rid of the nuclear capability, no more missiles, no more linkages for Iran with its allies across the region, who the Israelis and Americans call proxies, but we call them their strategic allies. And they want, I think what most people would want is to live a normal life in peace. But there's a bigger dimension to what Israel is doing, which is not often sufficiently discussed or analyzed, and the Israelis have to clarify this. They would like to make sure that nobody in the whole Middle East and all of West Asia can possibly threaten them, which in itself is a kind of reasonable aim. Every country in the world wants that. But they also want to be able to determine how things are done in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran, in Palestine, in Yemen. They want to have a strategic hegemonic dominance in the region without formally occupying these countries. And this coincides with a rising right-wing messianic, religious, ethnic, nationalist, extremist, militant trend in Israel, which is in the government now. And even government officials have talked, some ministers have talked about, oh yeah, it's okay, mirroring what U.S. Ambassador Huckabee said, oh, Israel should go and, it's okay if he wants to take over Iran or Syria or Iraq, whatever the Bible says. We have these wider dimensions that are troubling, and the immediate issues of nuclear and missile issues, those can be resolved. I think there's no doubt about that. But the wider Israeli goals are much more problem.
Alon, the UN nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi said on Monday that his agency stands by their assessment. There's no indication that Iran's nuclear facilities have been damaged in this latest barrage of strikes on the country. So does it make it even more clear that this is all about regime change fundamentally?
Well, look, President Trump, Rishaad, went on record in June saying that, quote unquote, we obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities after the American/Israeli attack on three major nuclear installations. Furthermore, American intelligence has indicated, under the Trump administration, by the way, that Iran has not pursued or has not developed its military nuclear program beyond what it did since the U.S. left the agreement, unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018. In May of 2018, that was under Trump's first term. Now, ostensibly, yes, both the U.S. and Israel claim that this is about regime change. How they plan to go by this, look, there's no instance, there's no example in history for regime change being induced via air power and missile attacks. Bar one example, one unique example, and that's Japan in 1945 under the threat of a very credible land invasion and following two atomic bombs. So that is definitely not the case. How the U.S. and Israel plan to induce regime change or just weaken the regime remains unclear. Look, we're only 48 hours into this war, and making any kind of, broad brush assessments or conclusions that this is going into X or toward Y would be seriously and wildly premature. But yes, in terms of what you just asked, it looks like regime change, and Mr. Netanyahu attested to that himself in that video that you just, in that footage that you just showed a moment ago, that this has been his dream, his yearning, he called it, for 40 years to change the regime. He's, in his defense, he's been consistent and adamant about this, but this is not about nuclear power. This is about regime change.
Mitchell, how does killing the supreme leader move the needle?
Well, this is the head of the snake for many, many years. This is the person that has sponsored terrorism all over the world and has proxies. You can call them, Rami, strategic allies, but many of them are terrorists. We've had diplomats, people that Alon Pinkas knew, who were killed in Argentina. I mean, based on operations and funding from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And, there's talk about the destroying of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. What revolution are they protecting? What Islamic Republic actually lobs missiles at innocent civilians in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia? Who does this? Meaning, why would people stand for this? Why would the world stand for this kind of threat? This man was a dangerous menace to humanity, and it cloaked himself in religion. It's a very, very difficult thing. And it was directly threatening, said that Israel has no right to exist, and on many occasions said Israel will one day no longer exist, and he will make that happen. And, sometimes you have to take neighborhood bullies like the Islamic Republic of Iran at their very words. And if they say they're going to do it, and everything indicates that they will, then they actually will. And the sad part of this whole thing is when the revolution started in 1979, they've poured hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars and know-how into better ways to kill Jewish and Israeli people and better ways to promote terror. And imagine what would have happened if they invested all of that money. And they're very, very smart. They've developed some great missiles that have hit Israel and gotten through our defenses. What if they invested that money in healthcare, finding a cure for cancer, agriculture, poverty? They could really have a great place in Iran, but instead they invested in death and destruction and ideology. It's sad.
Rami.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating explanation from Mitchell about what, is traditional Israeli Zionist perspectives. Well, most of it is exaggerated, diversionary. Some of it is not true. And most of it is not really relevant. It's just the traditional way that the Israelis and pro-Israeli groups discuss these issues. I mean, the idea that it's bad to fire missiles at civilians after Israel has been called by the International Court of Justice a genocidal state for killing tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza. So, but we don't have time to get into these point by points. We should do that one other time over coffee somewhere. The reality is that the state of Israel is the power in the region with the United States. They're the ones that have been going around, and essentially one after the other, starting with Iran and then Syria, Libya, Iraq, starting with Iraq, and the Palestinians and Lebanon, hitting anybody who they think threatens them. It's fair enough for countries to want to live in peace, and the Arab countries, including Iran, by the way, Iran has said for many years that they will live with whatever agreement the Palestinians agree with Israel on. And the Palestinians, through their institutions, have said they're willing to live with a Jewish majority Israeli state if it lives with a Palestinian state. So we should focus really on what actually is happening on the ground. And the bigger threat, I think, that we see is Israel trying to destabilize countries and fragment them into smaller entities. We've seen it in Lebanon, we've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Palestine. They try to make deals with minority groups in different countries. They don't want any strong, stable, legitimate countries around them that could challenge them, not necessarily challenge them to destroy them, but challenge them to force the Israelis to do things they've never done, which is to define their borders, implement the UN resolutions that Israel said it would implement. Israel never implemented the terms of acceptance into the UN in 1948. We really should focus on how can these people live together, Iran, Arabs, Israelis. They can, I believe.
Alon, have a look now at, if there is regime change, how does it affect Israel itself?
Well, depending on the regime. I mean, people were talking about regime change in Iraq and Syria, and we got ISIS. People were talking about regime change in Egypt, and we got the Muslim Brotherhood. Israel has been arrogantly pursuing regime change in Lebanon, and look where that led to. And so the question is, what is the new regime going to look like? If anyone is looking for a Thomas Jefferson to take over the reins from the Ayatollahs from the Islamic Republic, that's not going to happen. If anyone is thinking in terms of reverting back or going back to the Shah days, that's not going to happen. Regime change in history is something that is a bottoms up process. It does not and cannot be affected by an outside power unless that country is occupied, as was Iraq, as was Japan or Germany post 1945. So I don't see regime change in the absence of a clear opposition in Iran, with which Israel and the U.S., and I hasten to say Israel because I think that having strategic delusions of grandeur has damaged Israel in the past. This is not to say anything about Israel's enmity and justification for this war, justifications, plural in this sense, or in this war. But I really find it very difficult, and I think it is extraordinarily not viable to think of regime change right now.
Mitchell, if we do see a change in the regime there, what is a win for Israel? What is a lose for Israel?
Well, first of all, I like to just give a little history. I know people don't like the history so much, but, February 1979 was the last time El Al had a direct flight from Tehran to Tel Aviv. In the 1970s, we had 4 flights a week. I mean, we had relations with Iran, okay? But, so Israelis and Iranians were very, very closely connected. We had a lot of businesses together, a lot of tourism, and so forth. So for a lot of Israelis, there are still Israelis of Persian descent that are looking forward to going back and looking forward to, helping develop that country. But back to your question about a win for Israel is getting rid of the threat. And they are very, very capable with the missiles that they've developed, with the nuclear capability, which we think they might have, or they were getting close to. So that first has to be stopped. That's automatically a win. And we already won, because when Israel went together with the United States, it's not like the last war in June when it was Israel first, then the United States joined. Israel and the United States started this operation together, this war together. This is absolutely unprecedented, and it is very, very important. It's an important message that the security of Israel and the United States is aligned, and both are putting their firepower and troops and people and civilians on the line. A lose? I don't see how that happens, meaning even if there isn't exactly a regime change, as Secretary Hegseth just said in the live press conference, after June, when the nuclear capabilities were pretty much destroyed, they said to the Iranians, it's destroyed, now let's make a deal. Let's make a deal. They could have stayed in power. All they had to do was make a deal, and they were given chance after chance after chance, including last week and the week before, to come make a deal. And there would be no talk of regime change, and none of this would have happened.
How do you respond to that, Rami?
Well, I disagree with most of it, but it is a very accurate reflection of Israeli government views, which reflect the right-wing Messianic militant majority that now seems to dominate Israel, which is supported by the American right-wing government. So I think making deals is good, We should definitely make deals between Israel and all the Arab countries and Iran, but any deal has to serve the legitimate rights and interests of both sides. We can't have, when you go in and bomb somebody and destroy them and try to bring them to their knees and then make a deal, that's not a deal. That's colonial subjugation, and we've done that. We've experienced that for hundreds and hundreds of years, and the Iranians have suffered under colonial manipulation for many years. The Israelis and the Americans, by the way, for the last 75 years or so, have prevented two people in the region mainly from practicing their self-determination to live in their own system. The Israelis have hit it, and the Americans have done it to Iran, and they've done it to the Palestinians. And that's why Palestinians and Iranians today are the two groups that most vehemently resist Israel and the U.S. But this all can be resolved through negotiations, but only if the negotiations legitimately address the rights of both sides. And this is what Israel has refused to do. Israel has always put its own security as the priority, and if its security is assured and guaranteed, then the Israelis will give something to the other side. They've done this, they've tried this in other places with the Palestinians, for instance, with Oslo and other things. And look what they've got. They've got now a rampant annexation in the West Bank and a genocide in Gaza. So people don't trust the Israelis or the Americans now to keep their word. And this is why it's so critical to get some really serious mediation internationally underway, because a negotiated peaceful resolution is the ideal. And we should all work for that. This constant warfare.
Yeah.
I'm 77 years old. I was born in 48. I've lived with this all my life. I'd rather have a normal relationship, and it can be done if the Israelis accept that, which they don't.
Alon, could the first impact on the Israeli body politic be the upcoming election, which could see this war actually help the incumbent Benjamin Netanyahu?
I think it's premature to seriously assess that. There's no question, Rishaad, that Mr. Netanyahu is trying to remove himself from his responsibility for the worst catastrophe and debacle in Israel's history. That is October 7, 2023, and somehow engineer or manipulate reality, geopolitics, and turning that debacle into some kind of a strategic triumph via defeating Iran. I understand the logic of that. Whether or not that would translate into electoral benefits or gains remains to be seen. There's no election date right now. Supposedly, legally, it is scheduled for October, but it could happen. If the war ends and Mr. Netanyahu concludes that it was a resounding victory, he may try and call for a snap election within 90 days. And we're already in March, so 90 days would take us to June. And we're not far away from the legally binding date or scheduled election of October. So it really depends on how this evolved, because as you began at the outset of this program, this show, we all know how wars begin, and we can all analyze and see clearly what the absolute interests and benefits of each side, but we have zero idea how they evolve. We have no idea how bad things can get, or for that matter, how quickly positive they can turn. I don't know. I think it really is premature to assess any political implications.
Rami, is the worst case scenario for Israel essentially a regime change in the sense that you get an even more emboldened regime, perhaps one which is run by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC?
That would definitely be something that Israel would not want, but we essentially have that now. I mean, you can't get much more emboldened than the government that has existed in Iran since 1979. But the idea of totally removing the Islamic government concept and replacing it with something milder is a little bit naive, I think. The majority of Iranians would like to have a better government, a more efficient government, a less corrupt government, and less autocratic government. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, the Iranians have lived over the last century with a lot of foreign manipulation from Iranian, from Russians, from Americans, from British, from Israelis, and they're fed up with it. And they just want to define themselves. The Islamic Revolution was the first one that sort of did this in a way, but it's pretty harsh kind of government. But that's not the point. It's not for Israel to determine the degree of kindness or harshness of any government. The responsibility of governments is to abide by the law and not be belligerent to each other. So I think the Israelis are going to have to live with whatever comes out of Iran. But if you look at Palestine as an example, or Lebanon, for years Israel has bludgeoned the Palestinians and the Lebanese, and they've only continued to resist more fiercely. So there has to be a better way than military superiority.
Mitchell, how do you respond?
Well, first of all, Rami has said some things about the Netanyahu government and some of the Messianic people here. So the good news is, Rami, that in October there will be an election, and of the 9 million people that are going to vote here, 2 million of them are Israelis of Palestinian descent, Arabic speakers. So you should encourage all of your friends, relatives, and anyone you know to go out and vote in the election. It's a democracy, and there are many, many Arabic-speaking Israelis of Palestinian descent serving in the Knesset, and they certainly have the right to criticize, and they do that. And I think a lot of Israelis are not particularly thrilled with this government, especially when it comes to not that, but the draft of and the service of all Israelis equally, all Jewish Israelis equally in the army, and not giving an exemption to any Israelis for not doing that. So I think
Alon,
we're going to see some changes.
Sorry, Alon, you're trying to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Ami said about meddling in Iranian politics. Let's not forget that Iran is not monolithic. There are 93 million inhabitants in Iran. Only 60% of them are Persians. There are Azeris, and there are Turks, and there are Turkmenis, and there are Baluchis, and what have you. So when we're talking about the Islamic Republic and post-war Iran and regime change, yes, no, maybe, or to what extent and along what lines, let's not forget that Iran is not a monolithic country. A lot of things can happen there. Things, for example, that the U.S. never thought of or considered seriously when it dismembered Iraq in 2003. So you never know what's going to come out of this. It could be hell, and it could be paradise. But it's it's an even chance for both, either.
Thank you so much. Thanks to our guests, Alon, Pinkas, Rami, Khouri, Mitchell, Barak, and thank you too for watching the program. And you can, of course, see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Rishaad, Salamat, and the whole crew right here in Doha. Bye for now.